Hi, friends. We are hunkered down at the beginning of what is supposed to be a major winter storm here at Foggy Oak Farm. I hope any of you who are in its path are safe and warm, and that we get more fun snow than dangerous cold and lots of ice accumulation. This month, I want to share a fable with you that, as with many fables, has more than one interpretation. This fable hails back at least as far as the Middle Ages, so while it isn't quite as old as an Aesop's fable, it has plenty of centuries of good advice under its belt for us to consider. I'll tell you the fable, and then we'll talk about some ways you can interpret the lesson from the story. You may be able to think of others. Once upon a time, and long ago, a group of mice had gathered to discuss a vexing problem. It was more than vexing, really. It had become a scourge on their population. That problem, of course, was the farmer's cat. She was a terrible beast of a cat, larger and sneakier and deadlier than any cat that had come before her. She had decimated generations of mice during her reign over the farm, and the mice had learned to live in perpetual fear of her sleek gray body, terrible yellow eyes, and sharp, sharp claws. They had agreed to gather their council this dark and moonless night to determine what might be done to, if not defeat, then at least outwit their mortal foe. The council included every stripe of mouse, mice of the barn and of the house, of the field and of the meadow. And while their day-to-day lives looked rather different from one another, they certainly all felt they had a common goal. Many ideas were tossed about, but none satisfied the members. Finally, a mouse who had not spoken much at all stood up. I have a proposal that I think will solve our problem, provided you, my fellow council members, approve and carry it out, he said with an ostentatious bow. I think that you will all agree that our primary danger resides in the silent and cunning manner by which the cat surprises and attacks us. The rest of the council members were already nodding their heads. The sly and soundless approach of the cat did seem like the crux of the issue. But imagine, dear comrades, if instead of her noiseless ambushes, we could receive some signal of her approach. Why, we could easily escape her, could we not? The mouse paused, allowing the audience's anticipation to build. Therefore, I humbly submit my solution, that a small bell be procured and hung by means of a ribbon round the neck of the cat. And by this means we shall always know when she is about, and we will have ample time to escape and hide before she is close enough to catch any one of us. With a flourish of his paw, the mouse bowed again and took his seat as the rest of the council rose to applaud. Yes, indeed, that would solve the problem quite perfectly. They were all agreed. They clapped one another on the back in delight. They cheered, they celebrated, and generally made quite merry with the joy of finding the perfect mechanism for their enemy's defeat. So caught up in celebrating the idea of the solution were they, that it took some time for the members to notice that an older mouse had cleared her throat and was firmly rapping her paw upon the council table. Ahem! Indeed, that is an admirable solution, she began. But pray tell me, who shall be the one to bell the cat? At this, no mouse would make eye contact with her. They glanced at one another furtively. They cast their eyes to the ground. They shuffled their feet, and no one, not one, mouse spoke. The older mouse let the silence drag on for what felt like a long time. Finally, she spoke. It is easy to propose that something should be done. It is quite another to actually do it. The end. Okay, I think this is both a fun and pretty instructive little fable. It is where we get the expression to bell the cat, which is the name of this episode, and it means to attempt something that is almost impossibly difficult. I think that's a fun expression to have in your repertoire. The perhaps obvious lesson here is it's easy to come up with impossible solutions. Like if you complained that the sun was too hot and your brother told you that all you needed to do was blow the clouds in front of it. Or if you said you were tired of walking and your mom suggested you simply hover above the ground instead. We can all come up with silly or impossible ideas, but they aren't much good for actually solving our problems. An impossible idea might not ask anything of you because there's nothing you could do to accomplish it anyway, but it also won't make things better. But what I love is there are lots of other ways we can look at this story too. And since it has been around for several hundred years, people have looked at it in many different ways. If you want, pause the episode and talk with someone about what you thought of the story and what else it might be trying to tell us. I'll wait. Okay, so what else might we learn from the story? One interpretation from as far back as the 12th century is that laws are of no use without the means of enforcing them. In other words, the mice could say, well, we ought to bell the cat, but if no one had a way to do it, it meant nothing. If no one is willing to enforce the laws, then the laws don't protect anyone. In the 1300s, the story was something of a rallying cry for authors who were protesting the abuses of nobles on the common people. Because nobles, a small class of rich landowners, were believed to be better than commoners, which were the much larger class of people who were ruled by nobles and were essentially without rights. Kings were also thought to rule by divine right, which means they were chosen by God to rule over others. And between thinking that nobles and kings were inherently better than the commoners, it was very difficult for anyone who was not a noble, and frankly, even for a single noble, to stand up to lords who decided to abuse their power and take advantage of or hurt others, especially commoners. In France, the author Deschamps appears to have coined the rhyming French version of this quandary. Qui peindra la sonnette au chat? Who will bell the cat? Who will curb the abusive impulses of nobles who are not accountable to the people that they are supposed to take care of? In the 1500s, the moral was interpreted more as a risky plan can have no good result. So you make a plan that is inherently problematic, you're not going to have something good come from it. All of these are great and somewhat different takes on the moral of the story. But the other thing I want to highlight is that this fable is also an example of what is called the collective action problem, which is a situation in which each one person would be better off if they worked together, but they don't because they have competing interests that discourage working jointly. It's easy to see how this plays out in the fable. The proposed solution of belling the cat is easy, in a sense, because it requires only one mouse to take the risk involved with putting the bell around the cat's neck. It's therefore easy for all of the mice to support it. But no one single mouse wants to volunteer to take on the responsibility because attempting to add the bell to the cat's neck alone is also a pretty surefire way to get eaten. Thus, each individual mouse has an incentive to not be the one to bell the cat. But if the mice worked together to put the bell around the cat, or even tried to come up with a different solution that involved working together, maybe building a trap or somehow tricking the cat, they would stand a much better chance of actually accomplishing something. Instead of working together, though, nothing actually changes. The collective action problem happens when individuals choose to pursue their own profit, satisfaction, or safety at the expense of the group's long-term interests. Standing up to a bully can be a good example of this. If a kid is beating other people up, making them feel bad, or otherwise pushing people around, it can be scary, hard, and feel risky to be the only person who stands up to the bully and says, "Hey, cut it out." A group of kids standing together against a bully can have a much more immediate impact because it changes the calculus. Instead of bullying one person, I'm risking bullying a group that will have a chance of actually stopping me. The collective action problem is also closely related to a dilemma known as the tragedy of the commons, which happens when there is a common good or resource in a limited amount. The concept suggests that if many people have access to a shared resource, they will end up overusing and destroying it because some smaller number of bad actors will use more than their share and ruin it for everyone. Think of overfishing in the ocean as an example, or the rainforest. If everybody just used a little bit of the resources, there would be plenty for everyone. But because some individuals want to make a lot more money, they take so many fish or cut down so many trees and ruin habitats that the population of animals and resources can't recover. Both the collective action problem and the tragedy of the commons have important things to teach us about human tendencies. It is normal to think and care about yourself and your happiness. It's part of our survival instinct. But to have a better world and thus better lives for everyone, we also have to be able to look beyond what's best for just us as individuals and see how we can work with and support others to make things better. Envisioning a better future and working together to make that happen, usually just a little bit at a time, is a stronger recipe for lasting change than getting behind wild ideas that can never be made real. None of this is to say that you can't make a difference on your own. Of course you can, and I trust that all of you do that every day. There are lots of things you can do individually to make things better. Even just being kind and checking in on a friend who is sad makes their day and their life better. But when it comes to big, complicated problems, they are almost always going to need you to work with someone else to solve them. There are, I am sure, lots of other things we could draw from this short little fable. The ones I have talked about are just some of my favorites. I like that we can look at the tale from different angles and that what it means to us can change over time. Generally speaking, I think this is one where I see the value in all of the different lessons it provides, and it's been providing them for hundreds of years. You may have thought of other ways to look at it, and I would love to hear from you if you want to share your ideas too. You can email me at foggyoakfairytales@gmail.com, and if you give me permission, I may share your thoughts on a later episode. That's it for this month, but I hope you'll stay tuned for the next Foggy Oak Fairy Tale. And if you don't want to email, but you want some other Foggy Oak Fairy Tales content in the meantime, you can check out our Instagram at Foggy Oak Fairy Tales, or make my day by leaving a rating and review of the podcast on the platform where you listen. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.